Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to our final Maternity Matters webinar of 2022. My name's Guy Forston. I'm a partner in the medical negligence team at Irwin Mitchell, and I've got the privilege of being your host this morning. I'm joined today by colleagues from across the Irwin Mitchell national team, Rachel Mahapatra, Anne Kavanagh and Sharon Williams, who are all supporting our panel Q&A session later in the morning. Today we're focusing on the very important subject of how best to support those affected by baby loss. I'm pleased to say we're bringing this session in partnership with Petals, the Baby Loss Counselling Charity, which was founded over 10 years ago to provide specialist counselling in Cambridge. And since then, the charity's grown up to be, to provide support to thousands of families across 10 different hospital sites around the country, with the demand for support ever increasing. At Irwin Mitchell, we know through the work that we do in representing families just how important it is that they receive timely, compassionate and high quality bereavement care and trauma counselling. And of course, nothing can take away the family, the pain that families experience, but certainly getting the right support at the right time can really make a world of difference. With that in mind, I'm also delighted to share with you the news that we've now launched a partnership with Petals to help provide additional counselling to bereaved families who might require more sessions than is funded by Petals NHS partnerships. We really hope that that additional support will really benefit families around the country when they're dealing with some of the most difficult and tragic situations that anyone can experience. So we're joined today by Karen Burgess, founder and CEO of Petals, as well as Kim Paul, who before joining the Petals team as a counsellor, worked for many years as a bereavement midwife at the John Radcliffe in Oxford. We're also delighted to have Matt and Liam from Dad's Still Standing podcast. They launched their podcast during the lockdown from their homes in Essex in response to their own experiences of loss and the lack of tailored support for dads generally. So the podcast has gone on to be such a valuable resource shared across the world, in fact. And finally, it's fantastic to have James Titcombe with us today. Many of you will know that James became involved in patient safety following the death of his baby son Joshua in 2008 due to failures at Morecambe Bay. He's gone on to make a huge contribution to maternity safety through his work with the HSIB, the CQC, the Kirkup Inquiry on East Kent, and also his involvement in charities such as Baby Lifeline, Action Against Medical Accidents, Patient Safety Watch, and more recently the Harm Patients Alliance. You'll find all their biographies in the programme, which hopefully you'll received ready for today's session. Just a few housekeeping points from me before we start. First of all, thank you to all those who have already submitted questions. You can submit additional questions as the sessions go through via the Q&A function on your screen, and we'll aim to pick those up in the final session with our panel later in the morning. When submitting your questions, please do include your name and email address, so if we don't get to your question, we can make sure that we get a response to you directly after the session. If you do miss anything, don't worry, we'll be recording this session and the link to the recording will be sent out afterwards. And as the session goes through, but particularly towards the end of the session, we'll be posting a feedback link. Please do take just a couple of minutes to let us know your feedback. It really does help us to finesse our programme and ensure that we deliver the subjects that you really want us to cover. So finally, for me, I really hope that you get a lot out of today's session, plenty of food for thought and lots of practical advice. And at this point, I'd like to introduce you to the wonderful Karen Burgess from Petals, who's going to tell you more about their work. So over to you, Karen. I think we're starting with a video first.
I think we'd made the decision that we wanted to start having kids, and I think it happened quicker than we thought.
It was exciting, just really exciting. There was no alarm bells or emergency appointments. No, it was normal. I didn't feel the baby move very much, and I remember Googling it, as you do. I remember battling with my head, do I go in and get checked out? I didn't want to be seen as a crazy person. And then the next day, me and Dave went to the cinema, and I remember sitting in the cinema and saying, baby's still really quiet. And Dave said, do you want to go back in? We can go and get checked out again. And I was like, no, we've got our 38-week appointment tomorrow. We can just go in the morning. And then we went in the next day, and I guess the nightmare started. A midwife came in with a student, and then I think she got frustrated and she was like, I just can't do it. So then the midwife came in, and then she said, I need to go and get the consultant. And even then, it never entered my mind. I remember saying to Dave, I guess the worst is that we might have to have the baby now. I haven't got my bag.
I remember being very non-present. I was doing emails on my phone or stepping out and doing calls. Other people, obviously looking back, weren't finding the heartbeat, almost as it escalated and escalated and escalated to the point where a professor told us that we'd lost her.
And he was scanned for a little bit, and then he just said, I'm really sorry, the baby's died. So I remember thinking, they might have got it wrong. It might be, and it might be all right. I wanted to meet the baby, I wanted to hold the baby. The birth was pretty horrific. Oh, and then I remember them saying it's a girl, and I said to Dave, we've got a Vera.
Witnessing Alice give birth to Vera was really tough, and we had to do Vera justice and give birth. And it was just a disappointment at the end that she was still not here. Yeah, I said I'm going to really need help after this. I don't know if I'll survive.
Our bereavement midwife was telling us about some group therapies, and she talked about Petals. And I think later that day, I emailed Karen. I think we had our first session about a month after Vera was born, and I think it was the first time I felt calm. It was the first time I felt like I'd breathed properly. I remember squeezing Dave's hand, and I just knew we were going to be fine. We were going to be all right, and it wasn't going to take anything away or make anything worse or less. It was just going to make us better. I wanted to talk about her without feeling massive sadness. I wanted to tell people about her, because when you have a stillbirth, no one ever asks you questions. No one ever says, how much did she weigh? How was the birth? Who did she look like? But Karen just helped us incorporate Vera into our everyday.
And Karen and Petals gave us the mechanisms and the space to do that. So you felt like you could move past it as a couple without moving past Vera. So taking Vera with us and turning what is awful into something that, we're going to be okay.
We found out we were expecting Fred when we were on holiday. We had a session a couple of days after we got back, and I was desperate to tell Karen. It was a bit like, oh my God, how are we going to do this again? And 9 months feels like a really long time. And I remember at one session, I think I was about 30 weeks, and I said to her, I've packed 2 bags. I've packed for a bag if he's okay, and I've packed a bag if he's not okay. And I couldn't say that to anybody else. And it wasn't a shock or anything for her. It was just, okay. Because it's just so bittersweet to bring your next baby home.
If we have any fears or doubts or feelings that could make a pregnancy negative, or demons from what's happened to us in the past, so to have that ongoing support is priceless, because you feel like you have a comfort blanket. So Petals for us was probably a lifesaver. I dread to think how it would have affected mine and Alice's relationship without the support and our mental health. Given the situation and what happened, Petals have probably set us up for the rest of our life, I'd say.
So there's always a part of our life missing, always, every day. And we are a family of 5. And we celebrate her. So her birthday isn't the saddest day of the year. We always do something special. And that's because Petals put us back together. So we're like a vase which is full of cracks, but we can hold water, we can do our job. We're just cracked. Petals helped us manage our grief and allowed us not to be scared of our grief. So it was important for us, and it still is important now, that anyone who has to go through what we went through has a Petals.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to acknowledge that is quite a powerful film, and I am imagining for some of you it may be difficult to gather yourselves, so I will just slowly move forward with my presentation. I wanted to also start by thanking Guy for such a lovely introduction to Petals, and to say how delighted we are at Petals to have a partnership with Irwin Mitchell. I think there's going to be some great work we can do together. And I also want to say what a pleasure it is to be here today and have the opportunity to talk with you, to share our work, to share our films, and to tell you a little bit more about Petals. I'm Karen Burgess. I'm the Chief Exec and the founder of Petals. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organisation, how we work, what we actually do, and how our therapy impacts on the parents that we support. To start with, I'd like to just tell you a bit about how I came into this role. It was all very unplanned in my life, I have to say. I'm a counsellor. I've been a counsellor for many years, and in 2009 I was given the opportunity to work as a counsellor within a maternity unit, actually at the Rosie Hospital in Cambridge. And I went into that role, I think, completely naive. I had no idea how significant the experience of baby loss was within a maternity setting. I think we all think about maternity settings as the place where we go for the joy and celebration of bringing new life into the world. So when I realized that, you know, every day, certainly every week, there will be a couple within each maternity unit probably experiencing the opposite, experiencing the loss of a much wanted baby. I was really shocked to then have the privilege to work alongside those parents, to actually be with them as they are experiencing these life-changing moments where their worlds literally are shattered with news that their baby has died. That had a profound effect on me. I realized that parents really needed supporting through that, and I also realized that my skills could help them, and my presence could help them. So a couple of years later, when the often predictable cycle that goes on in the NHS, I found myself out of a job. I found that there was no longer any funding for this service that I'd set up. I knew that I couldn't walk away from this work. I knew that I had made a real difference and that I needed to continue the work. And so after much deliberation, after much consulting with colleagues and consulting with the parents that I supported, I decided to set up a charity. I thought this was going to be the most impactful way of being able to continue to deliver the work that I'd started and hopefully expand that work over the years. So in 2011, Petals was born. Could I have the next slide, please? So at Petals, we provide a specialist counselling service for individuals and couples who experience miscarriage, recurrent miscarriage, parents who terminate pregnancies for medical reasons, those who experience stillbirth or neonatal death of a baby. And we firmly believe that every parent in the UK should have easy and timely access to specialist counselling following baby loss. We also provide our support for those parents who go on to have a subsequent pregnancy, as most do, because we recognise how important it is that the work continues through that pregnancy. The impact of the loss is still very present in a subsequent pregnancy. And another area that we offer support with is to support you guys, the health professionals who are working in this field, because we recognise there's a cost to delivering care within this setting, and it's important that you have someone to talk to as well. Could I have the next slide, please? And the way our model, our business model at Petals is that we have partnerships. We have partnerships with funders, but we also have partnerships with maternity units. And these are the maternity settings that we have partnerships with at this present time. We're across hospitals in London, we're in Essex and Suffolk, we're over in Oxford, we are in Hertfordshire, and we even have a service that we're delivering up in Lancashire and South Cumbria. The two services that I've listed there in blue, Morecambe Bay and Nottingham, are actually new to us. They are literally just joining us, but it brings our total hospital partnerships to 12, and that is growing all the time. There are many others that we are currently in conversation with. To be in partnership with Petals as a maternity setting, we have a service level agreement, and that involves some funding as well. So we are dependent on funding being provided in order to be able to set up partnerships in this way. Could I have the next slide, please? And over the last 11 years of our service, we have been able to support over 7,000 client cases with Petals counselling service. We currently have 26 fully trained Petals counsellors working with us. We're also recruiting as I speak, and so we expect those numbers to increase in the next year. And at current levels, we're delivering around about 500 counselling sessions every month. Now, it's really important to us that we evidence our work. That is essential when we're looking to fund the work that we deliver. So we use a psychological assessment with every client that comes to Petals, and we also complete the same assessment as they complete their work with Petals, and that gives us our data that evidences the significance of our intervention. And what this tells us is that those clients, when they enter counselling with Petals, 59.4% of those clients actually have clinically defined mental health issues when they are initially assessed. Once they've completed our programme of counselling, this reduces to 10.3% of those clients. And when we look into that data a little more closely, what we can usually see is that 10.3% are those clients who already had some mental health challenges or had had previous loss or previous issues. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is the referral pathway for accessing Petals. All of our counselling now is delivered online. This was a shift that we made during lockdown and has proven to be very successful. If anything, our clients are telling us they prefer that to actually having the additional challenge of coming to a counselling session. So we are continuing to deliver our service online, and it means that obviously our reach can broaden in that way. So we have a very easy access process. We have an online form that can be accessed by health professionals, or individuals can access that themselves and self-refer themselves to us. Once we receive that referral, we will check their eligibility, and most of the time that just means that they have to have had a loss, as I've already listed, and that has to have been within the past 12 months. We will then pass them through our triage assessment process, and we aim to do that within 2 weeks of receiving that referral. During that process, we will gauge the need for that client, and we will allocate a number of sessions to them. They will then go into a very short waiting list. We currently actually don't have a waiting list, and then they will be passed on to one of our specialist counsellors and begin their counselling. They will attend their allocated sessions, and then on completion of their counselling with us, we will then reconnect with them to get an evaluation from them, quite a detailed evaluation, in which we're able to gather a lot of information to inform the development of the service. Next slide, please. So what is the psychological cost of baby loss? Well, I think the first thing to say is that it is complex. It really is complex. But what we see is that the majority of parents who experience baby loss go through a combination of trauma and PTSD symptoms that actually fits alongside then a complex and a complicated experience of grief. There's so many layers of loss, I think, for a parent who experiences baby loss. And it is that that complicates things and often results in depression or anxiety. And what we like to think of this sort of complex set of feelings and experiences, we recognize this as being like a psychological injury. I think that's kind of a fair way to describe it. And what we consider this psychological injury to be is something that we call traumatic grief. If I could have the next slide, please. So what is traumatic grief? Well, it's quite interesting, I think. Basically, traumatic grief is a term that describes this combination of PTSD symptoms alongside a complex grief. And what we generally find is that this occurs for individuals who may be involved in or witness the death of a loved one, or who may be required to make difficult medical decisions regarding resuscitation or termination of life of a loved one. So as you would see from my description there, this really sort of matches the experience that a parent has who experiences baby loss. The main feature of traumatic grief is, though, that this is the interaction between trauma and our natural grieving response. And what we see is that those who are impacted by trauma often struggle to connect with their grief, and that their natural grieving response is blocked by the trauma that they have experienced. And so their reactions and the way they feel are maybe not as they anticipate, and maybe as we would anticipate them to respond, because the overriding experience so often of a loss of this nature is that lives literally are shattered for the parents. This feeling that all their expectations, all their assumptions about their future life has been completely wiped out by this experience. Could I have the next slide, please? So, how do we recognize traumatic grief? How does it manifest? First of all, what we see is a preoccupation with the deceased, and I think that, you know, this can go on for many years if support is not provided. That certainly a mother can be completely preoccupied by the loss of her baby. It doesn't mean she can't function, but it is always sitting there for her in her mind, and that yearning to be reunited with that baby can be absolutely overwhelming. And the result of that can be this development of separation anxiety, obviously from the baby, but not just the baby, from other people around them. We commonly see parents who've been through baby loss suddenly becoming really frightened of losing other members of their family, frightened when they're letting their children walk to school, frightened that their husband, their partner is going to come home from work. So a quite irrational level of anxiety around death. And this difficulty to actually acknowledge the death and talk about it. I think this is often where the stigma around baby loss comes from, is that for parents it is just really hard to talk about the fact that they have lost a child. It shatters worldview, and it leaves parents feeling hopeless, that they have their plans for their future have been lost. And again, if untreated, can develop into some really, really deep feelings of anger, resentment, which block our natural ability to function with others, and almost become afraid of talking to other people about our experiences and engaging in a healthy, sociable way. So could I have the next slide, please? So this is how Petals aim to tackle working with traumatic grief. We have a model that is a 4-stepped model. And I'm just briefly going to take you through the 4 steps that we work with. Now, the first thing to say is that each step is dependent on the subsequent step having been delivered. I think that's important. The other thing I would say is that step 1 and step 2 of this model actually can begin within the maternity setting. I think if health professionals supporting bereaved parents within the hospital can be mindful of step 1 and 2, they can actually begin the work and prepare parents better for engaging within counselling once they leave the hospital. So the first step is really about stabilising the client, ensuring that the client is safe and reassuring them that they're safe, because when they're hit by the shock of baby loss, for most parents, they feel incredibly vulnerable and unsafe. And so to find ways of reassuring them and giving them a sense of control, grounding them in the space that they're in, and helping them to regulate their emotions, and building that rapport, building that relationship so that that trust is formed. The next step then is about, once the client is stabilized, it's about looking at how they're going to cope, helping them to identify their own resources for coping. And certainly with a couple, it's about connecting them with each other and helping them to recognize that they can support each other. It's about looking at the people around them, their friends and family, working out who is going to be supportive and who isn't going to be supportive. And that's really important too. So what strategies do they normally rely on when things go wrong? Because they can be really helpful at this time. Do they go out for a run when they're struggling or when they're stressed? Do they need to sit down in front of a movie and lose themselves for a couple of hours? All of these things are coping strategies that it's helpful to remind people of. And of course, if there are spiritual connections that they have, then it's really important to talk to them about that and see what comfort they can take and support they can take from those. And could I have the next slide, please? And so then if we go on to the 3rd stage and the 4th stage, this is really the work that we do in the therapy room. It's very, very important. This is the specialist area of the work that we deliver at Petals. Processing trauma. We work really hard to build that relationship with our clients so that we can help to process their traumatic experience. And that usually is about revisiting events, but in a very safe and controlled way. So talking them through steadily, through actually what happened. What we always recognize in our work is there will be what we call pockets of trauma. There will be those moments where suddenly everything shifted, where their world shifted on its axes, and we need to go back to those and revisit them. Help them to distinguish the fact that that there will be triggers, that there is always a residue of trigger from a traumatic experience, but that trigger is just a trigger. It is not the event happening again. And helping them to recognize how they respond to those triggers and to find ways of managing their response. So that once that trauma has been processed, what comes next is the full release of grief. And it can be a really interesting thing to witness in therapy, because this is as we come towards the end of our work, and very often what we find is that our clients are saying, I feel worse. I don't feel better, I feel worse. But actually that's what they need to feel. And it's about normalizing that and helping them to understand that this is their grief, this is their natural response and will be part of their recovery. And so we see a decrease then of trauma symptoms and an increase in their ability to cope. And the most wonderful thing is when a client can actually get to that place where they actually can experience some sense of growth from their trauma. That post-traumatic growth is what we aim for, so that they're not only have they going through a recovery process, but they've learned so much from this experience and strengthened their own resilience to cope with life, to go to the future and look forward for those future possibilities and to continue to live a meaningful life. Okay, bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm now going to leave you with another film. Thank you, everybody.
We had come together a bit later in life and just really wanted to start seeing if we could have a family right away, and got pregnant fairly quickly. It was a perfectly normal pregnancy. Everything was ticking along. It was just a really lovely experience.
We'd been to Cardiff the weekend before, came back with all this fantastic sort of stuff, a pram and preparation. Everything was sort of going fine, and we weren't expecting anything to go wrong.
I was at a conference on the other side of London. What happened is that over lunchtime during the second day of that conference, I suddenly started to feel really unwell. I knew that something terrible was happening. I ended up partially giving birth to Rowan in the room where I was staying for the conference. He was a breech delivery, and it was just really complicated. At that stage, he was 26.5 weeks, far too early to be arriving. He just looked so tiny and fragile. That was my memory of seeing him before he was whisked off in one ambulance and I was taken to the hospital in the other.
Once I knew how serious it was and that I definitely knew an ambulance was on its way, then I tried to just make my way over there as quick as I could. They came out to see me and they told me that Rowan had died, but my wife was okay. And I remember saying, "Oh, we were so close."
The midwives were brilliant. They, the first thing they said was, "Give us your phone." When Rowan was brought out to us, they just started taking loads of pictures with Jonathan's phone, which would not have occurred to us at all. It would not have occurred to us to ask anyone to take pictures of those moments. They're the only pictures of Rowan that we really have that we want to see. So the fact that we have them is really due to her kindness and her foresight.
We stayed the night in the room with him, and it was both wonderful and terrible at the same time. You know, it was great that we could spend time with him, but obviously it was, you know, just terrible.
We go to the cemetery. We go as often as we can. This is a place that's special to us, and it's a place that's special to our family. On his death certificate, it says that he lived for 39 minutes. The fact that we gave birth to him, that he was alive, even just briefly, is really important to us, and we have both a birth certificate and a death certificate for him.
Someone, I don't remember who in the process, but slipped us a leaflet which led us to then get in touch with Petals. Emotionally, it was really bad. It was good to go and talk to someone just about that process of what we've been through and to help us process all of that, and also help us to think about just, you know, getting on with life again and what life would be like from now on.
Having those sessions in the diary was brilliant, knowing that we would have a designated place to talk with Karen just about all the relationships shifting around us. No one wants to be in a club where what you have in common is having lost a baby. But that's where we were, and we had to find a way to make that our new reality and keep on living it. So Karen helped us to talk to each other. She helped us to find language to talk to the people around us with whom we were struggling. And I think she helped us to find a way to be kind to ourselves as well.
I would encourage men to go as well with their wives or partners, because I think it's a really helpful way to understand each other, and then you're more able to support each other as well because you know more about what the other person feels or thinks.
I wasn't prepared for how challenging a subsequent pregnancy would be, but it was brilliant being able to go to see Karen throughout that pregnancy and to be able to meet with her and talk through our anxieties.
That second pregnancy with Brecon was very stressful, but just helping us to deal with that anxiety, just talking about it and finding ways of helping us to deal with it was really useful. I would just encourage people to go. Supporting your partner or your wife is also important if you're able to process your own grief as well. Because if you're not doing that, it's going to pop out in some unhelpful manner at some point. So why not get the help you need? If you had an injury, you go and see a doctor or a physiotherapist or something. And this is such an impact on our mental health and our emotional life that it's like an injury. And why would you not go and get that sorted out?
The birth and death of a child transforms every relationship in your life. Who I am as a mother, as a parent, is shaped by that experience of having loved and lost Rowan. I'm very clear that I have 3 children and one of them was born and then died. Karen absolutely accompanied us through the worst of the aftershocks of losing Rowan, and she accompanied us into the new shape of our family.
Well, thank you, Karen, for your first of all for sharing those videos with us. Really incredibly moving, and also for your wisdom and insights. Just a reminder for everyone that you can post your questions for Karen or any other of the panelists through our Q&A function. We'll pick them up right after our sessions this morning. Now I'm delighted to introduce you to Matt Dearsley and Liam Preston. They created Dad's Still Standing as a way of helping other dads along their journey with grief, both in the immediate aftermath of baby loss and also as time moves on. And perhaps understandably, a lot of the attention is on mothers when something so awful happens, and there really is a lack of support out there for dads to know how best to support their partners, but of course to process their own loss themselves. So it's wonderful to have you with us today, Matt and Liam. Over to you.
People don't understand how risky pregnancy can be.
We're sort of programmed to think pregnancy, babies, joy, celebration. But being pregnant doesn't always mean that there's a healthy baby at the end of it. That should just be being talked about.
We were so close. Our baby was alive, like that morning, maybe that evening. Our whole world in that moment was gone.
With those words, I'm sorry there's no heartbeat, your world just collapses.
So many men talk about feeling like they're kind of a spare part in the room almost, because there's health professionals there dealing with everything, and what can they do other than just be there?
There wasn't any support for dads. What I was searching for was something by dads for dads.
I think it's really important for us to say that you're not alone, and that's something that Matt and I both felt when we lost our children. You feel completely alone and isolated, and this podcast is to reassure you that you are not.
What is so important to recognise is that the partner is witnessing this, and witnessing something as devastating as this. What they need is someone to listen to them, someone who understands it, who can bear to hear their stories.
FC Valoma is a really important club, and it's not just about football, it's actually about what it represents.
It is a football team of dads that have lost, basically supporting each other through football and through playing football. They're probably an extension of my family, is what I would describe them. It saved my life, 100% saved my life.
What I see comes from these experiences is obviously isolation and pain. But for those who can find some support, there's something really heartwarming and strengthening and rich that comes from something so tragic, that sort of unity and that sort of sense of togetherness.
It's so good to know that the support Matt and I didn't have, we're giving to someone.
We're 2 dads from Essex that have set up Dad's Still Standing podcast. And that was in response to what we both went through, the losses that we both suffered, and the feeling of not really having any support out there, and any support that we felt was useful for dads. So we came together, we set up the podcast, and I don't know whether I'll tell a little bit about my story. I'm conscious that I don't want to go on too long, but my background is I've had 5 losses. My first loss was a twin of my daughter. So I have a 6-year-old daughter, I have a 10-year-old son. My daughter Lily was born in 2016. We unfortunately lost her twin at 12 weeks via an ectopic pregnancy, and I didn't acknowledge that as a loss at that time because we had Lily at the end of it. Following on from that, we fell pregnant again in 2017. We went for what should have been a routine scan at 18 weeks, and were told those words that no parent wants to hear: really, really sorry, there's no heartbeat. From then, the only way I can describe it is that your whole world changes. Your whole world shatters. You are left in pieces and forced to try and rebuild yourself. Because of the stage of the pregnancy that my wife was at, we were sent home for 2 days and booked in to come back 2 days later. And my wife gave birth to our son Harry. That was in January 2017. Following losing Harry, I didn't really process it very well. I was really focused on supporting my wife, and sort of fell into the background a little bit with the support that I got. And I focused on getting my wife through it, getting my children through it, and try to carry on as best I could. We received some counselling from Petals, from Jackie at Petals, was absolutely brilliant. Helped us through it no end, helped us to process what had happened to us, and that we would be able to to find a way forward. Following on from that, we fell pregnant again in 2018, and almost exactly the same circumstances. We went for a routine appointment. We decided that we'd have a listen to the baby's heartbeat. Again, we got told those words again. We're really, really sorry, there's no heartbeat. And I remember thinking at that time, what have I done in a previous life to deserve this? How can I go through this again? I can't get through this again. I can't go through it again. And following on from that, I had a really, really bad, really bad time. It really hit me more than Harry did. And I remember having a conversation with the doctor, because I suffered with, as Karen mentioned, I suffered with a string of mental health problems, all directly correlating to what I'd been through. And I remember sitting with the doctor and saying, I don't know why this has affected me so much this time. And she very, very simply said, you probably didn't think you'd go through it again. And I didn't think I would go through it again. Following on from that, I was in such a dark place. I remember sitting with my wife, and I remember sitting with Jackie at Petals, and Jackie saying, you can do this, you can get through this, something positive will come out of this. And I remember sitting with my wife and saying, I cannot have this be a negative, as terrible and as traumatic as this is, I cannot have this being a negative impact on the rest of my life. Something positive has to come out of this. There has to be some sort of positive legacy from my losses. And we came up with Dad's Still Standing. And at the time, it was a bit of social media stuff, trying to put out a bit of positivity, trying to get a little bit of, a bit of encouragement from people that I can get through it and that they can get through it. And I then joined the football team, and I then met Liam, and we had a very, very quick conversation one day after football training. Do you fancy setting up a podcast? And we set up the podcast. And I'll come on to explain what the podcast is a little bit more once I think Liam's going to tell his story. But very, very simply, without my losses, there would be no podcast. Without our losses, there would be no podcast. So the podcast was created to basically give guys the tools that me and Liam didn't have, because I didn't know what to expect when I was going through my losses. I had no one to hold my hand. I had no one to tell me, other than I knew what was going on, I knew what was happening. I had no one to say, this is what's going to happen following your losses. Following your loss, this is what to expect in the next day, in the next 3 weeks, in the next 12 weeks, when you go back to work, when you tell your friends, when you tell siblings. I had none of that, and I muddled my way through it. So what we decided the podcast would be was, we didn't want it to be dads repeatedly telling their stories. We wanted it to be two dads saying to other dads, you're going to get through this, you're going to find your new normal. Yes, what you've been through is terrible, but you will be okay, because we're okay, and we are a lived experience through the podcast that you can go through baby loss, you can be happy following baby loss, you can find your new normal, and you can go on to live a new version of your life. We didn't want it to be depressing. We wanted it to be two blokes talking down the pub. And if anyone out there has listened to the podcast, you may find that you find yourself laughing at times for some of the things that me and Liam come out with. It is raw, it is honest, and we'd like to think it's helpful. It's almost a grieving baby loss for dummies, because it's what I needed when I went through the losses. It's what Liam needed when he went through the losses, and it's what is lacking, and we're trying to fill that void on what is lacking out there for dads.
I'm back, Matt.
Hi Liam, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry everybody, it's classic, isn't it? All works ahead of time, and then the second you start doing something, it all falls apart, just like Matt and I's relationship, if I'm absolutely honest with you.
After this, yeah.
So sorry for all that. So I'll give a really potted version of our story, because I'm conscious of time. My wife and I went through an absolutely normal pregnancy. Everything was fine. We went over our due date. I think we went to 41 weeks plus, because everything was fine, everything was normal. And then we found out as we were going, or as my wife was delivering our baby, that Paloma died. Matt and I in the podcast actually go through our stories in depth, if he hasn't said already. So obviously we've given you like these really like rapid versions of our story, and it gets much more emotional. But that was our version of loss, so slightly different to Matt's. But what united Matt and I was this shared sense that there is not really any support out there for dads, and certainly nothing tailored for dads by dads. And that's where this idea of actually what can we do that really sheds a light on that. And I think the key thing for Matt and I was that there's a lot of people who share their stories. And one of the things we found was what we didn't want the podcast to be is just another load of dads telling their sad stories over and over again. Because if you're in this place, you're already depressed, and it's already the worst thing that you can go through. And what you don't want to hear is someone, again, just go, oh, yeah, isn't it really terrible? And you're like, oh, yeah, it is really terrible. Oh, I feel awful about my story. Well, I feel awful about mine. And so, as Matt has probably already said, we really wanted it to be a toolkit for dads. We wanted to get them out of this problem. And I think what's been amazing for us is to go from two blokes in our bedrooms, which isn't the start of a punchline, by the way, two blokes in our bedrooms during lockdown in Essex, to this like global podcast. And I don't think we'd have ever thought we'd have reached that many people, or someone in a different county, let alone in a different country, and then on the other side of the world on a different continent. And I think what that really sparked for Matt and I was this idea that it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. Actually, you can feel just as lonely, and you can feel just as isolated and not know where to turn for support. And what's been great about the podcast is that when you get messages from dads in California or Sydney or in Singapore, it doesn't really, like, just getting those messages where they're going, I didn't know that this, I didn't know this existed. I didn't know people spoke about their babies. You're the first 2 dads I've heard talk about this. And knowing that you don't make people feel alone. I think that's a really important part of the podcast, is that we make dads not feel like they're going through this on their own. And there's loads of stuff in there which is all practical help, because, you know, as a bloke, you kind of just want a toolbox of resources to get me out of this mess. You know, how do I help my wife? How do I talk to my kids? How do I plan a funeral? These are all the things that we wanted to put into the podcast, because we felt that's what was missing from it. And I think that's a really important side of how you can kind of support dads. And Matt and I were kind of, you know, you throw these ideas around like, well, you know, what do we tell midwives about how to support people? They're the experts in this. And I think the idea around it is for dads, it's being a bit more practical. I think it's trying to set them up for what's going to happen afterwards. It's talking to them about, look, I know you're going through this, but your wife or your partner is probably going to need some help in this way. These are some of the things that you're going to experience. And I think that those are the types of topics that Matt and I thought would be really helpful for people to tell dads before they leave the hospital, or in those subsequent follow-up meetings and follow-up sessions. Actually, these are some things that could be really helpful for dads to know, because your world is about to be turned upside down, and it will be different, and you'll be experiencing it differently from those around you. Go on, Matt. Say something insightful.
No, I think it's just really important that we wanted the podcast to be, like you say, a toolkit, and we wanted the overarching message of the podcast is one that you will find your new normal, and we will help you find your new normal, because that's what, you know, through circumstances that were not chosen by us, we are equipped to do that now. You know, we're experts by default. We're not experts because we wanted to be. We're experts because we've had to be. And you know, it's interesting. The podcast's been going for about 2 years since doing the podcast. I've suffered 2 losses, and my view of those losses is not totally different to my previous losses, because the circumstances are different. But I've dealt with them differently because I've had, through the podcast, I've had the toolkits myself to use to get through those losses. So yeah, it's you know, the podcast it's all about positivity. There's a little bit of banter between me and Liam. I'm slightly funnier than he is, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. Yeah, and we have some guests on. We have some expert guests on. We have we try and cover everything that we can think of. You know, we cover what's going to happen at the hospital. We cover returning home. We cover relationships with friends and families, which, you know, is a big one for me. And, you know, there's a lot of strain that goes on there. We cover returning to work. And what I also just wanted to add to what Liam said is he mentions that we tell each other our story on the podcast. If you listen to those episodes, that is the first time that we have told each other our stories. So me telling Liam about my losses, his reactions are 100% authentic. It's not scripted. That is the first time he's heard me telling my story to him, and the same with him telling me his story. And we felt that was really, really important that we shared that for a little bit of legitimacy for the podcast. So yeah, but it really is just to try and fill that void that lacks in the support for dads that's out there.
And jumping in on that, I think what's interesting about when Matt and I went to do the podcast, we quickly realised we didn't know each other's stories, despite knowing each other for probably 6 or 7 months and playing on the same football team, which is all full of bereaved dads. We never actually told our stories to each other. And I think that goes back to this mentality and psyche with dads, is sometimes they don't want to tell their story, but they just want to know that the support's there. And that's what we found from the football team. And that's why we said to each other, actually, if we're going to do a podcast, we might need to actually know each other's stories, because that's probably going to be helpful and come up at some point. I'm not going to be around for the questions later, but I think Matt will address most of them. But there's an interesting one that's come through around listeners abroad, because obviously I spoke about that. And I think the support is very similar. That is patchwork. and it's what's in your local community, and it's what you happen to stumble on. And that's definitely something that's come back from almost all of the people we've spoken to who listen to the show or write in or message us, is that they don't know where to turn to support, and most of the support is tailored towards the mum. And that's why I think that when you can try and create a resource that's helpful for dads in a way that dads will listen to it, that's what I think is really key. And I think that what Matt and I have done really well is that blend of humour with authenticity and realness. And you know, we swear on the podcast, we laugh on the podcast, we get emotional on the podcast, we have people, you know, it's a real mix, and I think that's a really supportive way of dealing with it. But again, I think any support that you offer to dads, it needs to be tailored in what will work. And all dads, you know, dads aren't just one homogenous group, but it needs to be focused on what would work for that type of psyche. And I think that's a really important way that we try and deal with trauma, is looking at who that audience is. And when Matt and I sat down to the podcast, we were like, actually, what do we think guys will want to hear? And I think that's how we try and provide the best level of care and support for dads going forward, is really trying to focus it on them as individuals.
Well, fabulous, thanks both. I mean, I've listened to the podcast, and I have to say the content, you can just see that it really fills a gap that existed. I know, presumably that's why you went out there and did it in the first place, because there is a real need for it. So thanks for all you're doing with that, and thanks for sharing your insights today. I think often the biggest impact is made by those who've experienced personal tragedy themselves and sort of go on to feel motivated to help others, you know, with real determination to improve things for all. So yeah, again, thanks for doing all you're doing. I know that we'll share details of the podcast. Presumably you can access it from all your usual download places.
Just Dad's Still Standing, it's everywhere.
Yeah, fantastic. I know you're all over social media as well, so that's fantastic. We can follow you that way. Please do post your questions for Matt later on, as Liam unfortunately has to leave us for some work commitments, but Matt will be around, and we've got loads and loads of questions coming in, which is fantastic. So I'm now delighted to introduce you to Kim Paul, who really brings a unique insight to this really important subject. From her extensive experience as a midwife for many years, then as a specialist midwife, specialist bereavement midwife, and then more recently as one of the members of the counselling team at Petals. So thanks, Kim, ever so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Guy. I'm really privileged to be here today, and you know, like everyone else that works in this field, feel humbled and privileged to be working with families in these situations. I did lose contact halfway through Karen's talk, unfortunately, with the teams. So I hope, fingers crossed, I'm not going to have any more glitches. So my hope today is to give you a bit of an insight into the role of the bereavement specialist midwife, and its real value and hopes for future development within the services. So moving on to the next slide. I really believe this is where it all began for me. In 1967, I ran home from school, straight up the stairs to meet my new baby sister that was born at home that afternoon. And, you know, I was in absolute awe of the midwife, you know, where this baby had come from, you know, as a then 9-year-old was a bit of a mystery to me, and I firmly believe that the seeds were sown at that time. I went on to study nursing and then qualify as a midwife in 1982. And at that point in time, I was never to know that the latter part of my career would have been supporting women and their partners and families through the devastating experience of baby loss. So, can I have the next slide, please? Many people have said to me how wonderful it is to be a midwife, and it is, it truly is. But I've often found myself bursting their bubbles when having to explain my area of speciality. It still remains a shock, even in this day, that such a role exists. It's a really difficult subject matter to be open and honest about, but the reality is that as midwives, we support women during pregnancy, giving birth, and through the postnatal period, whatever the circumstances, and we have done for thousands of years. It's hard to sum up a definition of a bereavement specialist midwife. It's a role that's evolved over many, many years, and in response to bereaved parents' needs. Something I've come up with is that it's someone who provides holistic, individualised care to women and their families following a baby death, during pregnancy or shortly after birth. This will include expert clinical skills, sensitive communication skills, and a genuine willingness to listen to parents' needs on an individual basis. It also requires that ability to support and train staff and to work in a multidisciplinary team. It can be a really physically and emotionally demanding job, and some of the essential qualities that it requires are things like kindness, compassion, resilience, patience, and at times sheer determination. But as always, an advocate for bereaved parents and the provision of bereavement care within the maternity services. I think it's one of those areas of midwifery that you have to feel comfortable in. I know many have personal reasons for either embracing this area or equally avoiding it. And the role is likely to vary slightly depending on the individual unit. For instance, some units, the specialist midwife will work more clinically than others. So moving on to some key aspects. What do they do? Well, they are there to help parents absorb and understand often unexpected bad news. They guide and support them through informed choices around delivery of their baby, and step by step help them to understand and prepare for the process of delivering their baby. Bearing in mind that on the back of this, they're going to be shocked, they might not quite believe what's happening, they can't take it all in. It's this multi-layered thing that Karen has already mentioned that we really need to be mindful of. They may spend a lot of time dedicated to talking through incredibly painful topics such as post-mortem, registration and funeral options, and they can be a vital point of contact as a link person to other services. Essentially spending time really getting to know the couple, understanding their fears and supporting them through a time that many of them would never have imagined would ever happen. And also, I think, helping them to understand that this will actually lead on to a grieving process and that they're allowed to do that. I have to say that reflecting back on my experiences, that if I had to say one thing, and that would be nothing can prepare you for that moment that you say goodbye to a couple leaving the hospital without their baby. Or worse still, watching them place their baby carefully into a small white coffin. So moving on to some more aspects. the importance of making memories. So things like sensitively discussing their wishes around seeing and holding their babies. Some people might be really shocked that that's even offered. So it takes a real sort of slow, sort of step-by-step expertise in sort of sowing the seeds, planting that idea, getting to know, you know, what they might think about that, what might be difficult for them, perhaps what they are afraid of surrounding that. So supporting them in making choices around creating memories and spending time with their baby in a way that's right for them and allows them to parent their baby. So this might include things like bathing, dressing their baby, sometimes involving siblings, grandparents too. But a real sort of sensitive modelling with them when you're interacting with them and their baby, talking to baby just as you would to any other live baby, chatting to the parents as you're with them, you know, allowing that sort of normal conversation that you would have with anyone that has a live baby. You know, oh, who do you think he or she looks like? Oh, look at these lovely little toes. Whose nose have they got? All these things. So not to be afraid not to talk about those things, because this is what parents say they missed out on. They never got the chance to do. So by doing this, you're giving them the permission to do that. And it can make a big difference to the memories that they take away with them. And many, many bereaved parents go on to really value those precious times and will treasure them forever. So as I've said, gently supporting them in that fear and guiding them, but without coercing them is quite a skill, because we know that lack of memories can make grieving process more difficult for them in the long run. Can I have the next slide, please? The role has expanded enormously beyond clinical care since 1995, when I first began to work in this area. I remember feeling well supported at the time and learned so much from my colleagues, but actually even more from the bereaved parents themselves. And I think, you know, listening today to everything that's been said and shared so far, and the films, you know, speak volumes. And any of us working within this field can gain so much from being involved in hearing and listening to other people's stories, how they perceive the experience, and take that on board. In about 2003-2004 time, a change in the ward management led me to having some more time to focus on the bereavement service. Prior to that, my clinic role had been a lot more clinical. There were 2 dedicated bereavement suites and a small core of midwives, all knew how to give good care to women and their families experiencing stillbirth, late miscarriage and termination for medical reasons. And there was already an existing collaborative relationship with the chaplaincy team, the registry office, neonatal pathology department, and a close relationship with the fetal medicine unit and the obstetricians. Interestingly, there was not a job description, and I don't think there still is a nationally recognised one. But my experience of working in this area for about 9 years already, and feedback from families and staff, helped along the way. We used many resources to support our learning and practice, and attended as many study days as possible, taking the opportunity to network with colleagues. And there's a wealth of resources out there which can be both useful and overwhelming at the same time, and these are just a few of them. And I have to say, keeping on top of all the advice and guidance was a really challenging part of the job. and even more so disseminating it to everyone. So moving on to more recent times, the issue of staffing levels has always been a challenge, and it was sometimes difficult to justify a smaller caseload to spend quality time with bereaved families and to support other less experienced staff. But it feels even more acute now, and maternity services are under huge pressure to get it right in extremely difficult circumstances. In 2018, the National Bereavement Care Pathway was launched, and 9 standards of care were set as a framework to guide improvements in the quality and consistency of bereavement care. As it's already been alluded to today, you know, it can be patchy and inconsistent. This has really been welcomed by midwives and maternity support workers, but one of the barriers to implementing these standards is still staffing shortages. The RCM have highlighted this, and there are a couple of articles that were released in June this year highlighting exactly that. One of the main things was that midwives are still unable to complete crucial training because of staff shortages. Can I have the next slide, please? This drive towards family-centred bereavement care when a baby dies is not new. I remember being encouraged by this report in 2014, and that's now embedded within the National Bereavement Care Pathway. Since I retired in 2017, I've seen some developments. For instance, rainbow clinics for specialised support in pregnancy after loss are now available in some trusts. These clinics often focus on what extra emotional and practical support the woman might need, such as extra scans, continuity of care, counselling and planning how best to support them in the postnatal period. Perhaps having a discussion with them about, you know, providing a private room to be in that postnatal area, allowing partners to stay so that, you know, they can have that sort of personalised individual support at a time that is still going to be really challenging for them. This is another expansion of the bereavement midwife's role since it first emerged, and a much needed recognition of support needed in pregnancy after loss. And I know that many bereavement midwives will actually have dedicated time to working within this pregnancy after loss clinic with the obstetricians. In our local trust, in the last few years, I've seen wonderful improvements in the bereavement suites. They have a surrounding garden area for bereaved families to use. But I'm still really saddened to hear that in spite of a significant increase in the size of the team, they're still under a lot of pressure to achieve everything that they would like to. I know they're using maternity experience bereavement questionnaires to provide evidence, and that the National Bereavement Care Pathway recommends 24/7 care. And I'm told that this is still unachievable with the current amount of bereavement staff that are trained. They're really up against it in terms of providing this 24/7 care, and with the volume, the sheer volume of bereavement cases that they have in some of these very large units. I believe that in September and October alone in Oxford, there were 25 bereavement cases with one full-time bereavement specialist midwife and a full-time maternity care support worker. How, you know, on earth are they going to provide the care that they really need? Having said that, I am told that they are going to be having another 34.5 hours midwife too, but even so, you know, I think that they're really struggling, and it takes its toll. It takes its toll when you care so much about delivering this service and you feel that you can't actually give what you need to give. So moving on again to the next slide, please. Thanks. I think, you know, time is just one of those things that comes into this so often. One of the challenging things has always been time, and it's often underestimated how long it takes to train a midwife or maternity care assistant in bereavement care. Not only do they have to become confident in the delicate and demanding face-to-face contact with the parents, they also have to be confident in handling these most precious and delicate babies, and how they model this with the parents is a crucial aspect of the care. Parents will always remember that their baby was treated with dignity and respect. In addition, I can't begin to explain the amount of time it learns to take to complete all the associated paperwork, which are often required by law, and also to ensure seamless care. They need to have more time to pass on these skills on a practical level. And as we emerge out of the pandemic, we all need time to recover and regain some lost time. We know that bereaved parents can never regain that time, but the memories they will have will be influenced by the care given at such a pivotal time in their lives, and it will have an impact on the way they subsequently go on to grieve and mourn for their babies. Especially how you treat them as couples. You know, I just wanted to reiterate, you know, what Matt and Liam have said about dads and partners. When you get caught up perhaps in an emergency situation, for instance, it's so easy, you know, to focus on what's happening to the woman.
I think we might have lost Kim at that point, in which case we may need to draw her talk to a close at that point, but hopefully she can rejoin us at for the Q&A session. Okay, so I'm going to move on now, but thanks to Kim, and hopefully she can rejoin us shortly. Last and by no means least, we've got James Titcombe. I mean, James is another one of those amazing people who use their personal experiences of tragedy as a catalyst for campaigning for change. You'll know that he's made an extraordinary contribution to patient safety in the last 14 years since his son Joshua's tragic and avoidable death. I've already mentioned his involvement in various inquiries and patient safety organisations, but adding to that, in 2015 he published his personal account, Joshua's Story, and was also awarded an OBE for his dedication to patient safety. So I know that his patient safety work continues at pace, most recently his appointment to the independent review team to the ongoing review by Donna Rockenden at Nottingham. So over to you, James. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you ever so much. Great to be here, everybody. I caught most of Kim's talk there. Yeah, wow, what an important talk, and it kind of chimes with a lot of what I'm going to be saying today as well. So I think you've given me a really generous introduction, so I won't repeat that, but really good to be here. And I'm going to talk about something slightly different, although definitely related, and that is after there's been harm. So where there's been a bereavement, where there's been problems with the care that have contributed to that, how we can improve that process for families, and perhaps looking back historically, recognising that the way healthcare organisations have done that in the past has sometimes compounded the harm that's already happened, and how I'll signpost you to some recent work that's all about reducing that compounded harm. So I'm going to start off by telling you my personal story. So if we could move to the next slide, I'll start the presentation. So this really is where this journey for me started. So prior to that photo, or at the time of that photo, my career had nothing to do with patient safety. I was working in the nuclear industry, in engineering, and that's a really kind of happy photo that's you know, I look back on and think we were so optimistic. It's a young family. That's my daughter, who's now 17, so you can get an idea of how time has flown by. But we're on holiday in March in 2008. And my wife there is pregnant with our second child, who we know we're going to call Joshua. Normal pregnancy, everything healthy. And then about 3 weeks before Joshua was due, we had this week of feeling very poorly and not very well, and got home on the Saturday night. And my wife called for me from the bathroom, actually. So, James, I think my waters are broke. So as any calm, independent man would do, I phoned my mum in sheer panic and said, Mum, what do I do? You know, advised to go to the hospital. Sure enough, at the hospital, found out that my wife's waters had broke. We were checked over, sent home, not feeling very well, as I say, but kind of reassured it was probably a virus. Came back the next day, same thing happened, sent home again. And that happened until the Monday morning. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see that on the Monday morning, Joshua was born, exactly 7:38. And that's a photo of Joshua probably 10 minutes after he was born. Now, I won't go through the full circumstances of what happened next in every minute detail, because it would take too long. But sadly, after that photo was taken, things did start to go wrong. It started actually the concern with my wife. So she had a very high temperature and she collapsed, and my wife was given fluids and antibiotics, and she recovered over the next couple of hours. My wife got better. But during that time, we started to ask about Joshua. You know, if my wife needs antibiotics, what about Joshua? And if we go to the next slide, I'll just briefly explain that what actually happened was, over the next 24 hours, he had lots of signs of being a very unwell baby. So he was had a very low temperature, which is a classic sign of sepsis, neonatal infection. He was breathing very rapidly. He was mucousy. He was lethargic. He didn't want to feed. And we were reassured during this period that that he was okay, that it was normal, nothing to worry about. And regrettably, my wife and I accepted those assurances. Very sadly, he wasn't fine. He was developing the same infection that my wife had. He was a very seriously unwell baby. He desperately needed antibiotics, but he wasn't assessed by a paediatrician. And sadly, he collapsed at 24 hours of age with overwhelming sepsis. And if we go on to the next, slide, I'll just tell you what happened next. So he was basically transferred to Manchester, and is it possible to go on to the next slide? Sorry. Great. Okay, I think we've perhaps skipped one slide, but that's absolutely fine. So he went to Manchester, was given intensive care in Manchester. In Manchester, we were told basically his very seriously unwell, and we were told about this treatment option called ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, and he was flown to Newcastle and put on this life and basically a lung and heart machine for babies. And we had these kind of 8 days where we were really hoping Joshua would pull through. Very sadly, towards the 3rd of November, he developed bleeding in his left lung, and that bleeding became worse and worse. And then on the 5th of November, there was no choice but to turn his life support machine off. So Joshua died on the 5th of November. So we went from this very optimistic, new family coming around for Christmas. I was at home thinking I'd be picking the new baby up. And then here we are 9 days later, and Joshua has died. You can imagine how difficult that was. And Kim's spoken about bereavement care and how important that is. But for us, there was this other dimension of knowing that something had gone wrong, something that this shouldn't have happened, and wanting answers. And I've spoken about my career at the time. I was working in the nuclear industry, so I was very used to this kind of culture of openness and where perhaps a rusty bolt in the wrong place would trigger a proper investigation. And I was expecting that, but in many ways what happened next and the processes the trust went through were as hard to deal with as Joshua's death itself. So very quickly, the coroner didn't open an inquest. He said Joshua died of natural causes. We were told to go down the complaints process. And when we did that, we were told that some of Joshua's medical records had gone missing. So that really, we lost faith in that process very early on. We were told by the chief executive of the trust that Joshua's death was a one-off, that nothing like it had ever happened before. In fact, we know that they were actually a series of similar serious incidents, as they call them in healthcare, in the same year that Joshua was born, and actually this had triggered concern amongst the Strategic Health Authority, which was the oversight body at the time, to the extent that they asked the trust to commission a review. And this gives you a little bit of an insight into the kind of defensiveness that can happen, because the trust commissioned a review. It became known as the Fielding Report because of the author, but at that time the trust was going through a foundation trust status application, and that Fielding Report found lots of serious problems with the safety of the maternity unit. But because the trust feared that negative news would impact on their foundation trust application, effectively that report was hidden. So it didn't result in any changes. So a whole load of investigations that really weren't fit for purpose happened, and that had a huge impact on us and on my family. And I'll talk to you then, in a few slides time, I'll talk you through that. But ultimately, even though Joshua died in 2008, we only had an inquest that came about in 2011. And if we go on to the next slide, please, I'll talk to you about the inquest. So this basically came about because I'd gone through the whole complaints process with the NHS right the way up to the Ombudsman. I didn't get anywhere. I was told that it wouldn't be worthwhile for the Ombudsman to investigate. And at that point, having no other options, I went back to the coroner in Newcastle and really begged, actually, over a lot of letters for the coroner to open an inquest. So you can see this kind of battle that we were having. Eventually the inquest took place, and there were 10 failures of care. I won't go through all of them because they're on the screen there, but basically 10 very serious failures in care that the trust previously had not acknowledged. So these were new things that we were finding. And the trust, the inquest process triggered something else. So the police at this point began to get involved, Cumbria Police. The Care Quality Commission got involved because they attended the inquest, and the NMC attended the inquest, and they were so concerned that they went back into the trust after this inquest and carried out a review. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll show you what this resulted in. So after Joshua's inquest, Monitor at the time went back in with the NMC. and they did a review and it found 119 significant risks to mothers and babies that it said the trust hadn't identified and hadn't addressed. So this was in 2012, with Joshua dying in 2008. And we started to ask questions, how is it that these problems had gone unrecognised and not acted on? So deaths of babies in 2008, and we've still got significant problems in 2012. And I got together with a group of other families and we campaigned for an inquiry, and we were quite lucky. We got a lot of traction, a lot of support, met the Secretary of State for Health later in 2012, and he announced an investigation, and that became the first Kirkup report. I'll talk about the second Kirkup report in a moment, but the Morecambe Bay investigation, and it published in March 2015. And if we move on to the next slide, I can tell you what, just one more click, what the report found. So if you just click through to the next 2 bullet points, please. So basically a lethal mix of failures that we had no doubt led to the unnecessary deaths of mothers and babies. And this is this paragraph here, out of all the paragraphs in the report, I think this is one of the most powerful and the one that resonates with so many other inquiries. So errors occur in every healthcare system, but what's inexcusable is the repeated failure to examine adverse events properly and to be open and honest with those who suffered to prevent occurrence. Yet this is exactly what happened over the whole period of this report from 2004 to 2012. So if we move on to the next slide, I want to talk to you about some work that happened at the Trust after the Morecambe Bay investigation report was published. So you might think that having a big national report that would have provided the answers we needed in terms of what happened to Joshua, but actually it didn't. What we found was that this big national investigation had told us where the Trust had gone wrong. It told us that they'd failed to investigate properly, but we didn't actually have the answers we felt we needed in terms of what happened to Joshua, what actually was the detail of what happened and how the Trust responded. And we wanted really for the Trust to own that. We wanted the Trust to understand itself what happened to Joshua, so that we could have confidence that it understood what needed to be done and it understood the impacts. So I had a conversation with the Trust and they agreed to commission a new external review of Joshua's case. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment. But they did something else as well. So after Joshua died, we were very much separated from the staff involved. We weren't allowed to meet them, and it became very adversarial and quite toxic, really. By this date, so 2016, some of the midwives involved in Joshua's care had been struck off by the NMC, but one midwife had been suspended for 9 months. And I think the Trust had a dilemma about what to do with this member of staff. So I live in quite a rural area. We know each other, lots of people, it's quite a small community. If I'm in the shop in Tesco, I'm likely to bump into some of these staff that were involved in Joshua's care. And this particular person, I very much felt that actually nobody involved in Joshua's care wanted that outcome for him. I absolutely don't believe anyone was acting deliberately to cause Joshua harm. But what I was very angry about with this particular person is that I felt they hadn't been open and transparent. They hadn't been honest about what happened. So I had this opportunity, and the chief exec said, would you be prepared to meet this person? And I agreed, and I thought, prepared what I wanted to say, and I thought this would be a good chance to, get off my mind what I wanted to say to this person. And I felt very angry because I felt they hadn't been open and honest, but I didn't blame them for Joshua's death. So I kind of prepared what I wanted to say, and I got in the room, this feeling of intense anger, really, that if somebody hadn't been honest, they couldn't possibly care about what happened, and that was really impacting me. So I had the meeting, I was in the room, very carefully facilitated, and the first thing I was able to say to this member of staff was, look, I don't blame you. I want you to know I don't blame you for Joshua's death. And I wanted to go on then and explain why I was angry about the dishonesty, but I actually didn't get the chance, because at that point the the midwife said to me, but James, I blame myself, and I have done every single day since. There are so many things that I wish I did differently. And she cried, and I could tell it was genuine. And so far from this image that I had of this uncaring professional who had kind of washed her hands of what happened and hadn't taken any responsibility, the truth was actually the opposite, that she cared deeply about what happened, and it had affected her hugely. And I can't say enough how healing that moment was. I needed to know that, and we actually ended up having a bit of a hug, and all my anger towards that person completely disappeared. And I think that's quite a powerful story, and I think it's just such a shame that we can't have those kind of conversations more often. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that I think could help in terms of allowing those kind of conversations sooner. And in 2016, so this trust that had been found had covered up and been dishonest, actually published this fresh summary of Joshua's case. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll talk you through that. So this investigation was done several years after Joshua died. It made 18 recommendations that would have been made had this happened recently. When the trust looked at those recommendations, they found that actually the trust had implemented the vast majority of them. But in fact, when they audited that, most of the changes that were recommended didn't happen, weren't implemented for about 5 years after Joshua's death. So the trust, and this is the chief executive, Dame Jackie Daniel, she was very open, and she said this, had we done this sooner, we can be sure that clinical outcomes would have been better for others. And just one click, please. And the Kirkup report, this is the tragedy of this, confirmed that 6 babies actually died after Joshua. So there were a huge number of different investigation processes, and if we go on to the next slide, I've listed all of them, and please do just carry on clicking, because I could be here for an hour talking you through all of these. And if we just pause, maybe one more click. One more. So there was an internal review, there was an external investigation, there was a local supervisory investigation, there was the fielding report, which I mentioned, there was an inquest, there was an investigation by Cumbria Police. None of these investigations were actually doing what was needed, and I've actually done the maths on this, and probably all of those processes cost in the region of about £10 million. Okay, if you add them all up, it's extraordinary. And my reflection really is to share with you, had that in process that was done in 2016, so that final external investigation, had that been done at the time in 2008 rather than several years later, how many of these other processes wouldn't have been needed? And I think I believe that the vast majority wouldn't have been. I think that first investigation done properly, engaging my family kind of openly and transparently, could have avoided all those different processes. And if we have a couple more clicks until it changes slide, please. What was the impact on us? And yeah, please go through all the bullet points, and I'll talk through them all at the same time. So it's hard to overstate this. I think people have a desperate need when these things go wrong, and that need is to make sense of what happened. And if you're not able to make sense of what happened, if there are bits of the jigsaw that are missing, if you feel that the trust aren't being open and honest, if you feel that there's not that genuine apology, this can compound that harm. Already one of the most unimaginably hard things any family could imagine, losing a baby, and then having this added compounded problem of having to fight and to battle. So we felt shock, we felt guilt, we felt trauma. There was broken trust. The healthcare organisation that we all trust and love and had cared so well for Emily when she was born years earlier, that's all gone. That trust has gone. Mental health problems, so quite open about post-traumatic stress disorder. Still to this day, I have flashbacks. The pressure that puts on your relationships, your marriage, your children, the ripples are huge. Career, I managed to change career, but my career was really, it was hard to hold down a job whilst fighting this. This phrase, complicated grief, and I think that's absolutely about not being able to make sense of what happened, and this need to make sense of what happened. And that was prolonged over a 10-year period for us. And it sounds, doesn't it, like this is an extreme example, and I hope it is, but also, there's evidence, and I know people, and we'll all know people, this isn't that unusual. There are lots of families who have had this kind of experience. I've recently been involved in the East Kent investigation as an advisor, meeting lots of the families there. And the next slide, I just want to really highlight that this isn't just about one case. So the Kirkup report published very recently in September, and it had a whole chapter about the experiences of those families. And there's some conclusions and themes in that chapter, and I think that I'm just going to highlight them here. So theme 6, being forced to live with an incomplete or inaccurate narrative. And I think that's what happens. That's what happens if you don't get that openness and honesty, if you're not involved in the investigation, if you can't sense check and have that kind of logic in your mind, then this becomes something that doesn't go away. It becomes something you relive over and over again. And the report also highlighted the consequences for families, which weren't dissimilar actually to what I've described. So not knowing if things might have been different, living with constant what ifs, feeling guilty, and in many cases feeling responsible for what happened. So the families feeling that it was their fault. Changes in your beliefs about healthcare, mistrusting clinicians, being forced into legal processes, panic attacks, problems with relationships. So in a healthcare system that, the Hippocratic Oath is about first do no harm, isn't it awful really that we often do cause harm? And this kind of harm, this compounded harm, when something has already gone wrong, is absolutely preventable. I really believe that. So I'm getting close to the end of my talk. I just want to really finish off by talking about some of the positive things that are happening now, and perhaps what the future could look like, building on some of the work that's happening. So if we go on to the next slide, there are a couple of documents and a couple of pieces of work that I think anybody working in the healthcare system, I can kind of signpost you towards. So the first picture there is a project called Learn Together. This is Jane O'Hara and her team, and they've co-produced, I think it was a 2 or 3 year project, working with families and working with healthcare professionals to set out what good guidance should be. So in terms of properly involving families in that investigation process. So looking back at my experience, if we hadn't had that denial, if we'd had that candour, if we'd been properly involved in the investigation, if our thoughts and recollections were given equal weight and properly considered, so much of what we went through could have been avoided. So I'm so pleased actually that we are moving in that direction, and I really recommend this guidance is superb. It's a really, really superb piece of work, and it gives people perhaps in local organisations, in local trusts, really good guidance and templates and resources about how to involve families properly and compassionately. And on the right, whether we've touched on this today or not, I don't know, but that obviously things in England are moving. So the National Patient Safety Strategy is in flux at the moment, and we've got the new Patient Safety Incident Response Framework. Lots I could talk to you about that, positives and some concerns, but one of the really good things is that family engagement is a really key part of this, and the link there is guidance that accompanies Peace Earth to do with a good best practice model of engaging families. So I think that's one thing we could all do really, really well. We could absolutely all improve the way we engage families and the quality of those investigations. But I think there's more we could do, and perhaps the next slide is somewhat aspirational, considering we don't do that previous bit as well as we could do. So recently, so a few years ago, a wonderful colleague of mine called Joanne Hughes, and Joanne is a mother who lost a baby, a young girl who is still going through this process of trying to find the answers. And we got together and we founded an organisation called the Harm Patients Alliance. And what that really wants to promote is this idea that there's a duty of care. There should be a duty of care on healthcare organisations. When things go wrong, that duty of care should be to help people compassionately, not just to learn. Learning is really, really important, not just to learn, but also to help them heal and recover, as we would do if somebody had a physical injury. If somebody fell in a hospital and broke their leg, we would help them heal, and we'd recognise that duty. We don't seem to recognise that duty as clearly as we should. Emerging now more and more thinking about this restorative practice and what that means, and Joanne could talk so much more eloquently about this than I can, because she understands it and she's studied it. But basically the framework looks at what happened, why did it make sense at the time. So healthcare professionals don't go out of their way to cause harm. It's the opposite. They go to work every day to do their best. It's very likely that the actions they took were because they made sense at the time. They need to understand why it made sense at the time, so they can be learning and there can be system changes and all of that. But actually the bereaved family need to know that as well. They need to understand how, why did this make sense? Why did this happen? The restorative practice looks at who was affected and what their needs are, and it looks at who's responsible for meeting those needs, and it looks at how harms and relationships can be prepared. So in a very crude way, because it wasn't done in this framework, the meeting I had back in 2016 with the midwife was an element of restorative practice, and how healing, genuinely true, real healing for both that midwife and myself. And the final thing, it absolutely does look at how we can prevent this from happening again. And perhaps very, very close to the end now, what we've got to do is make these bits not as hard, not the battles that they are at the moment. So no family should have to fight to be assured that that step has been taken. And I think all this guidance coming together and perhaps moving towards restorative practice can help towards that. And the final slide, please, is just a little plug for our organisation. So there are lots of really fantastic resources on this website. We're doing work. So recently we've done a survey of our members, which is about their experience after harm, and so many of the themes I've talked about are there. We're really trying to do some good work, and there's lots of resources, more information about restorative practice there. And I think the final slide is just a link to the website and our Twitter handle. So yeah, I really hope that's been an interesting talk for you guys, and it kind of hopefully resonates with what the other things we've been talking about today as well. And I'll stop there, but thank you very much.
Thanks so much, James. Really, really appreciate that. Interestingly, as we've been talking, there's a comment on Twitter that came through just saying that, the fact that you keep saying that you're really quite lucky each time you made a step in the progress for inquiries is really, really heartbreaking, and the hard work of parents like you at a time when you should be, you're living with your grief and dealing with that. You should never be needed. I think the comments you make around this move towards restorative practice is really quite encouraging. The work of you and many others, and I know it's something that's coming about in New Zealand and some other jurisdictions as well. So yeah. Okay, well I'm going to move on quickly now to our Q&A panel so we can make the best use of our time. For that, you're going to have a break from me, and I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, partners Julianne Moore and Rochelle Mahapatra. So thank you both, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Guy. In fact, you've only got me today, so Julianne's been rushed off for an emergency, so we're just dealing with the Q&A with me. I just wanted to say we've had lots and lots of comments about the presentations today, including one that asked whether we could consider covering more ethnic minority sensitivities in pregnancy and baby loss. I'd just like to refer you to part one of our this series where we dealt with maternal mental health and stillbirth. In fact, there was Dr. Nusrat Mir and Banesh Nazmeen on that panel. You can get that on YouTube. If you can't get hold of it, then just reach out to Erwin Mitchell and we'll send you the recording. James, I'm going to stick with you because after that fantastic presentation, and obviously so sad that, you know, an investigation, if it had been completed in 2009, you said that 6 more babies would have survived potentially. And we do see this a lot at Owen Mitchell. The investigations go on for months and months, and not only is that catastrophic for the families, but it also means that lessons are not learned. We've had a question: with all the inquiries, internal and external investigations, how do we get to the point where drawing all this learning together is well coordinated and brings about change?
Well, that's a really big question, isn't it? And but I think there's some different elements to that. So what we've got to stop doing, I think, is treating every major inquiry as isolated and as this kind of one-off, and we'll keep on going to the next investigation report and it'll keep on highlighting the same themes. The East Kent report, actually, I might be a little bit biased, but if you read the East Kent report, it has a very different approach. It doesn't list hundreds of recommendations. It actually keeps to, I think it's either 4 or 5 key themes, and they are the absolutely fundamental things that we need to get right. So what I think we need to do is stop generating hundreds of different recommendations. I think we need a national strategy. So at NHS England, and I think they are moving towards this, that's actually simplified and streamlined, and getting everybody pulling in the same direction. So I haven't got the short, quick answer to that, but it has to involve one plan. It has to be streamlined, and it has to involve the whole system pulling in the same direction. Hopefully, which I think that is where we're heading, but we're not there at the moment. I think we've still got too many different recommendations and too many different things pulling in different directions at the moment.
Thanks a lot, James. Matt, I'm going to come to you next, because your story was so powerful about how you'd had not just one experience, but multiple experiences and at different stages of loss. And one of our questions is, should the care of parents who experience loss at different stages, e.g. before 20 weeks, post 28 weeks, term or a neonatal death, do you think that that should all be dealt with in a different way? I'll come to some of the others of you afterwards.
It's a really good question, and I don't necessarily think that a one-size-fits-all approach is the right approach. There is definitely a difference between the aftercare for my most recent losses, because they were, one was at 6 weeks, one was at 12 weeks. There's a definite difference and a definite void of aftercare in those circumstances compared to when we lost Harry and Daisy, which was slightly further on in the pregnancy. So I think there needs to, I think you need to deal with it on a case-by-case basis and really feed off how the parents are perhaps presenting to you. I think COVID has complicated a lot of that. So my loss sort of 18 months ago, that was in the middle of a circuit breaker lockdown. My wife dealt with it on her own. She was in the hospital on her own dealing with it. I was sat in the car park, trying to work out what was going on and trying to guess what was going on in the hospital. So I think there definitely needs to be a difference in the care provided, but I think the main thing for me is the follow-up care and the follow-up to the parents that have lost. And I think there's a void that you can fall into, especially with early term losses and early term miscarriages, where you just don't get that follow-up care. And it's, anything you need, refer yourself to your GP. I think there's, there needs to be a little bit, perhaps more follow-up care for the earlier term stuff.
Karen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Sorry, yes. Yeah, I think what the first thing that sprang to mind when you said that, when you posed the question, was that what I see is often problematic is the fact that different gestations of loss come through different services basically within maternity. So they may come through gynae, they may come through the labour ward, they may come through neonatal services, and unfortunately, they all seem to kind of work all very independently, and we need more collaborative care, bereavement care, across those three areas, I think, so that we can get some sort of consistency in the support. And my sense is the National Bereavement Care Pathway is working really hard to address that, but there's still a long way to go with that. So I think yeah, that needs addressing. The other side of it, of course, the sort of the postnatal care and the support that we're providing at Petals, we're working across all of those losses. But as Matt says, I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think it is really about how that individual parent is coping with their loss, to what degree they've connected with their pregnancy, and maybe previous losses that have been experienced will determine what their psychological and emotional needs are going to be going forward. And this is why having a specialist service like Petals is so important, I think, because we can work individually with each of the parents and the couples that we work with.
Thanks a lot, Karen. I think that really flowing from that, the next question is really that resourcing. And actually, Kim, you talked about this, the lack of specialist bereavement midwives that are available in the trust now because of the training not coming through. Question is, how can we persuade healthcare providers, commissioners to prioritise the funding for counselling services? I guess that's also training as well. Kim, do you want me to go to you on that? I think you're on mute.
Okay, fingers crossed you don't lose me again. I'm really sorry about this. I don't know. I think it's a historical thing. It's always been difficult for as long as I can remember, and I've always felt it's not that the funding commissioners don't care about what happens. It's that their hands are tied and they have to prioritise where the money goes, and it's so difficult. You know, however much training they have, you know, at the end of the day, it's down to how do they pay for this? How do they pay for this? And it's not just, you know, the bereavement midwives themselves cannot pass on their skills to other members of staff, to student midwives, to maternity support workers, because they're stretched to the limits. They don't have the time to spend with them to actually make this happen.
James, I just wanted to ask you, just following on from that, in your experience, I mean, you talked about how you were kept away from the staff in the hospital really because of the complaints process. Did you get any counselling or support? Did your family have anybody there for you?
We really struggled actually with that, and at the time I actually had some private health insurance with my job, and I actually had some CBT counselling through that, but I really struggled, and I know that I probably could have referred myself to the GP, but I think there's issues with waiting lists, so I think it was definitely a gap at the time. Hopefully things have improved since then, but I think, yeah, I think what, as Kim was saying, it should be there. We should have funded, commissioned counselling support for families in this situation, and that certainly wasn't there at the time Joshua died.
We've had lots of comments in the chat, Matt, about your podcast and what a great thing it's doing to fill a gap really for dads. Do you want to just expand on what the hardest subjects are that you find for fathers to speak about when this happens, and what can you do to help them open up? Sorry.
I think the hardest thing is getting the dads to open up in the first place, is getting the dads to recognise that actually there are dads out there that are willing to talk. There are dads out there that are willing to listen to you, because I think a lot of the time the dads think that what they're feeling is completely on their own. No one's ever felt like them before, and it's completely unique in what they're going through. And to a certain extent, what they're going through is unique, because their grief is their own grief. No two people grieve the same. but it's also not unique because thousands and thousands and thousands of people experience baby loss, and we, as a this idea of toxic masculinity is to hold everything in, be strong, be the big alpha male, and it's kind of counterproductive. I think the key is getting to the point where you're getting the dads to open up, because dads will want to talk about their babies, dads will want to talk about it, but it's letting them realise that actually it's okay to talk about it. It's not, there's a safe space to talk about it, and I think the podcast is hopefully providing that safe space, because we get messages daily from dads from all over the world saying, here's my story, and they don't necessarily say it because they want a response. They're saying it because they're dying to tell someone about their story and they don't feel that they can. So yeah, I don't think the issue is that they don't want to speak. I think the issue is getting them to the point where they feel safe enough to speak and that they're not going to be judged.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. One for you, Karen. Statistically, fathers will not register for a referral. What other groups are Petals working with to try and reach that group of fathers? You talked, I think, earlier about you're now in 12 healthcare partnerships. My sort of calculations are there's about 200 trusts in the UK. I don't know if that's right, but that's still actually quite a small number, even though you're doing a massive job to support those people.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, it's the tip of the iceberg, really, that we're kind of able to support right now, and it really needs to change. So I think part of what we're doing is certainly the question was about dads. So one of the issues is, I think, and this is almost like the elephant in the room, I think, in this particular area, is the fact that it is, of course, the woman who's the patient, the mother who's the patient, and this means that the attention within the hospital most of the time needs to focus on the care of the mother. And so from our point of view, the referrals that come through to Petals have usually been, the suggestion of counselling has been addressed to the mothers. And so what we really try and encourage those health professionals to do through our kind of partnerships and connections is that they work more holistically with the couple, and that they say to dads, look, you can make this referral too. This doesn't have to be just for your partner, for your wife. This is for you too. You can go on your own for counselling as well. And we are seeing an increase in numbers of dads actually coming to counselling on their own, which is really encouraging, as I think this whole conversation is opening up and dads are feeling more able to do that. We also have a closed Facebook group called Petals Dads, which is a space for dads to talk to each other. So we try and get that out there and encourage dads to connect with other dads and share experiences and access Petals that way too. And I think I don't actually go on that Facebook page because obviously it is a closed group for dads, but talking to some of the dads who are on it, I don't think there's enormous conversations that go on, but there is a sense of belonging to something and feeling that if you need something you can reach out. But the reality here is, and I think it's so important we talk about this, there is still so much work to do, and we really have got to work hard at that, continue to work really hard at opening up this conversation.
Thanks for that. And I mean, your films demonstrated that fathers were having support from Petals, and how much they were very powerful stories, about how they put their families back together. So that's fantastic to see. I'm going to come to you, Kim, with the we've had numerous questions about after baby loss, supporting families through a second or a further pregnancy. What would you be able to offer on advice on that or support?
I'm just trying to unmute. Okay, sorry, in terms of can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of bereavement midwifery or counselling?
Just where a family's lost a baby, if they subsequently go on to have another baby, the specifics of the support that they require.
Well, first of all, I would say, never to underestimate what gestation those losses have been at in the past, because that we shouldn't be making any assumptions that a 38-week loss is worse than a 12-week loss, because it may depend on that person's history. They may have gone for years and years and years trying to have a baby, so the gestation it is unique to that particular person. So supporting them in a subsequent pregnancy loss is helping them to know how to manage the anxiety around it, because they are massively anxious about this happening again, and helping them to know how to source the support for that, whether that's through Petals, whether it's encouraging them to talk more to their GP or their midwife about their needs, and guiding them in accessing things like rainbow clinics, for instance, not being afraid to speak out, having a voice, really giving them permission to have a voice, to voice those fears and to voice those concerns, and that it's okay to do that.
Just going to come to you, James. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think it's I'm just looking in the chat as well at Nicole's question, which is related. I think dads, as Matt was saying, absolutely can there's a barrier for dads that they need some support and signposting to kind of overcome, I think, and the more we can do to kind of reach out and signpost people to those kind of support services and safe spaces and forums, I think that's really helpful. But no, probably nothing to add other than that.
So we've had a number of questions relating to people from ethnic minority backgrounds or different communities, really, and how the sort of advice differs there, and the type of support that they require and the places that they'll go, and whether they're prepared to actually come forward and ask for help. Karen, is that something you've got experience of?
I will be perfectly honest about this and say that it's a real challenge. It is a real challenge for us all, I think, to be able to access some of the minority groups with counselling, and it's a complex issue, I think, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the ways we are looking to begin to tackle that, and I mean we have some experience of it. Certainly, some of our partnerships in Northwest London, hospital partnerships we're working with, some of them across over in Suffolk. Actually, we are getting a sort of a steady stream of certainly Asian and Black clients coming through and from different cultures, and finding that our work is very effective and successful with those groups. But it's how we make it okay for those groups to actually engage with counselling is the biggest challenge. And so one of the things that we're working on is to connect with the bereavement midwives and the teams within the hospitals who are making those referrals, to help them and to ask them, what are the challenges, what are the barriers, do you think, what can we be doing differently? Some of the obvious things that we're looking at is how is recruiting counsellors from Black and ethnic minority groups, and that is something I'm actually involved in right now, is trying to do that, because I think that can make a real difference and make Petals feel like a more comfortable space to be in. The other areas, of course, are some of the challenges around language, and so we're looking at how we can work with interpreters, or how we can get native speaking counsellors to work with us. It's, as I say, I don't want to pretend we've got the answers. What I see in the last 10 years is, we've come a long way in terms of actually being able to open up this discussion and recognise that counselling is needed, and getting parents to engage with counselling. But it's a long process, and we've got a long way to go. And I think we're, well, you know, things like this, and we're all really committed together to making that happen.
Matt, is that something that you've covered in your podcast as well? I think you've gone on mute again.
I'm muted and then I am muted. Sorry. So it's something that we are trying to cover very simply. I'm unable to give the perspective of a black male father that has lost a baby, because I am not a black male father that has lost a baby. I can only give the perspective that I have. But we, as we said, we try and get as many guests as we can onto the podcast to give as many perspectives as we can. So the area of ethnicity and the area of LGBTQ plus people that have suffered baby loss is something that we are trying to cover. We've not managed to cover it yet, but that's purely because everything that we've come up with on topics to cover has been alongside our journey and our toolkit that we want to try and give Dad. So it's, as Karen says, it's a really tough area to not to combat, but a tough area to infiltrate, I think. But it's something that we are trying to do with guests that we're potentially lining up. So watch this space would be my answer for that one.
We've also had a comment, Matt, for you and Liam, that the Still Parents podcast have invited you whether you'd like to go and speak to them in the future, and they work with the Lily May Foundation as well. So we'll put you all in touch with each other afterwards so that you can speak.
Perfect.
So I have now lost my other question. This always happens when you're doing it live. It's really one for you, actually, James. I don't know whether it's some of the work that you've been doing with the Harms Patient Pathway, but one of the questions is that hospitals seem to give a whole variety of advice post baby loss or guidance to professionals and parents. Is that something that you've experienced?
In terms of the kind of variation in advice, right? So yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think we talk about the National Health Service, but actually everybody's doing things in their own different way. And you mentioned the Harm Patient Pathway, so I'll bring that in quickly. So this is a project that the Harm Patients Alliance have set up with AVMA. And basically it's very much about standardising that response. So when something's gone wrong or when there's been an unexpected event, introducing that idea that there should be a set of principles that around a duty of care. So really encouraging people to look at that. And I think that's the way we should look at this. I think there should be a duty of care here. It shouldn't be optional. We should be much more standardised processes. There should be funding for bereavement counselling. It should be seen as the duty of care that all organisations have. So definitely lots of variation. I think the more we can do to highlight best practice, what's really working, where is it working well, and help spread that so things are more standardised. I think that would be really helpful.
I think it resonates a lot with me that you said it's the duty of care rather than, I mean, we've all lived through the duty of candour, which is supposed to flag up with patients when they've been harmed, but it doesn't really take them any further. And I think that's a very good point. I'm going to finish there because we've done all our questions. I hope I've done them all. If we haven't, we will be answering them and send them out with the recording. And I'm very pleased to say that we've nearly kept time, Guy, so I won't get told off later. And I'm just going to hand back to Guy Forster. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so again, thanks for everyone to submitting questions and comments. If we have by any chance missed any along the way, then we'll make sure those are answered directly for you. But can I just take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers for not only giving up their time, but just sharing such an incredible insight and advice, as well as the testimonies as well from Matt and Liam and James in terms of what they've been through and their hopes for making things better for everybody in the future. And I know that all of us working with families affected by baby loss want to be able to do our best for making that a little bit easier for everyone involved. As Karen says, it's sort of in recent years, it does feel like there's much more awareness of baby loss, and people feel more able to talk about these things and the impact it has. But I think sometimes the challenge is really to move awareness into action, and it's clear that the demand for support never really goes away, and the importance of organisations such as Petals and roles such as specialist bereavement with midwives, it's just so vital really to ensuring that families get well connected, well coordinated and high quality support. We know there are funding and staffing challenges in particular, but it's clear there's still lots of gaps. Finally, can I just thank all of you for joining us on our webinar today, focused on baby loss. Please do let us have your feedback via the link which has been posted. You'll find recordings of all of our previous Maternity Matters sessions on our website, owenmitchell.com, which you're more than welcome to share with colleagues or anybody else that might be interested. Also, please do follow Owen Mitchell on social media for more news of our 2023 programme for Maternity Matters as it's announced, and then also details of our other webinars across the group. But for now, I just, thank you all. Thank you to our speakers, and have a good afternoon, everyone.